The sand grains are warm under my bare heel, each one a tiny, familiar world. They sift between my toes, a feeling imprinted since childhood, like the rhythm of my own pulse. The air smells of salt and something wild and green, the way the dunes always smelled after a rain. The house stands behind me, silent, bleached by the sun, looking out at the endless blue horizon. It's not just wood and glass, it's 1,000 summers, my mother's laugh echoing from the porch, my father teaching me to cast a line from the shore. It's the anchor of my life, solid, permanent. Or so I thought. It takes maybe 30 seconds for the gut punch to land, 30 seconds of ocean breeze and the illusion of peace before the cold reality shatters it. The feeling is sharp, like swallowing glass. This place, this feeling, this anchor, it's not mine anymore. Not in the way it was meant to be. The sand feels suddenly foreign, hostile. The sound of the waves is no longer soothing. It's a roaring in my ears, drowning out everything else. A cold dread starts to spread from my stomach, numbing my fingers, making it hard to breathe the salt air. How can something so utterly, irrevocably mine be gone? Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before felt like that horizon, endless, calm, predictable. There was the house, my inheritance, the legacy my family had built on this stretch of coast. There was Michael, my husband, charming, ambitious, a man I believed loved me as much as he loved the life we were building, a life centered, I thought, around the security and history this place represented. We lived well. Not extravagantly, not in a way that flaunted the quiet wealth tied up in this land, but comfortably, assuredly. My days were a gentle current of managing the small foundation I ran, preserving local history, nurturing the garden that bloomed defiant against the salt spray, and planning a future that always included sunset walks on this very beach, maybe with children, grandchildren. It was a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing your roots run deep. I trusted Michael implicitly. He handled the finances, the business side of our lives. I handled the world I could see, the one I could tend with my own hands. It seemed a fair division. He was good at it, I thought. Sharp. Focused. The disruption didn't arrive like a storm. It was a slow, insidious leak, a creeping tide that drowned everything before I even saw the water rising. Little things first. Vague answers about property taxes, unusual questions about the zoning laws from his side, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. A nervous energy I hadn't seen in him before, masked with forced cheerfulness. I dismissed it. Business stress, I told myself. He was a developer after all. Their world was complex, high stakes. I didn't pry. I trusted him. My trust was a solid, unwavering thing, built on years of shared laughter, quiet mornings, the easy intimacy of two people who knew each other's comfortable silences. Then came the letter. Not addressed to me. Tucked away in his briefcase, a thick envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I pulled out the document. Legalese swam before my eyes, but certain words screamed. Sale agreement, Coastal Development Holdings, finalizing transfer, my family estate. Sold. The address was unmistakable. My address. The address of the house I was standing in, the house where my family history breathed. The sale price was staggering, a number so large it felt unreal. And then I saw my name. Signed. Not by me, by Michael. With a power of attorney I hadn't known existed. A power of attorney, I later learned, hidden within a stack of routine financial papers I'd signed without a second thought months ago. The world tilted. The solid ground beneath my feet dissolved into the roaring sea. The air left my lungs. My blood turned to ice. Sold. He sold it. My home. My history. Without telling me. Using my own hand against me, a signature buried in paperwork I trusted him with. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing my breath, making my vision blur.
How? Why?
He was my husband. We shared a bed, a life, dreams. How could he rip the foundation from under us, from under me and say nothing. The letter felt heavy in my hands, a death warrant for my past, present, and future. Confrontation was inevitable, a raw, tearing at the fabric of everything we were. I held the letter, my voice shaking, foreign even to my own ears. He was calm, too calm. His eyes, usually warm, were cold, calculating. There was no apology, no explanation that felt remotely human. He spoke of opportunity, of diversification, of a better future for us. He painted it as a shrewd business move, necessary, inevitable. The estate was tied up, he argued, illiquid. This deal, this massive sum of money, would set us up for generations. He looked at me as if I was being naive, sentimental, as if the house was just bricks and mortar, not the repository of my entire identity. It was the smart thing to do, he said, his voice low, reasonable. A performance. The smart thing. I echoed, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. You sold my home, my family's legacy. You used a signature, you tricked me into giving you. It wasn't a trick, he insisted, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. It was part of the financial planning. You authorized me to handle these things, not to sell the ground I stand on out from under me. I cried, the control I was clinging to starting to fray. This isn't a business deal, Michael. This is everything. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're being emotional. This money changes everything. We can buy anything we want anywhere. I don't want anything else. The scream was trapped in my throat. I wanted this. I wanted our life here. His indifference was another layer of ice over my heart. He didn't see the depth of the wound he'd inflicted. Or worse, he didn't care. He saw numbers, assets, transactions. He saw me as an obstacle, a hurdle of sentimentality to be managed. That was the first real struggle, grappling with the fact that the man I loved, the man I trusted implicitly, was a stranger capable of such cold, calculated cruelty. Trying to make him understand, to feel the weight of what he'd done, was like shouting into the wind. He had already moved on, mentally spent the money, built new castles in the air with the bricks from my demolished past. The initial legal consultations were soul-crushing. The power of attorney was valid. The sale agreement, signed and witnessed, was binding. There were no grounds to overturn the sale itself based on coercion, not without proof of duress that would be nearly impossible to demonstrate. Michael had been meticulous, covering his tracks, using the trust I'd given him as a weapon. The lawyers spoke in hushed tones about the complexity, the cost, the low probability of success. They talked about negotiating for a better settlement, for a piece of the money he'd gained. Money felt dirty, tainted. It wasn't about the money. It was about the betrayal, the violation of sacred trust, the theft of my history. Every walk on the beach was a fresh agony. The survey markers appeared first, small orange flags fluttering like cruel pennants on the dunes. Then the chain-link fence, a brutal scar across the familiar landscape, blocking the path to the tide pools where I used to find perfect shells. The air filled with the distant hum of machinery, the promise of destruction drawing closer. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching the inevitable unfold with horrifying clarity. My early struggles were futile attempts to slow the tide with bare hands. Phone calls to the Historical Society, pleas to zoning boards, desperate conversations with neighbors who offered sympathy but little practical help. The machine of development was already in motion, powerful, relentless. Coastal Development Holdings, the firm that bought the estate, was a faceless entity, a conglomerate of concrete and steel replacing sand and memory. Rising challenges arrived daily, each one a smaller cut after the initial gash. Eviction notices, formal letters from the development firm outlining timelines, demands for access. Legal bills mounted, the cost of fighting a losing battle. Michael became more distant, colder. He moved out, citing the untenable atmosphere. He spoke of divorce as another necessary step, another transaction. He was already building his new life, presumably with his new wealth. The life we had was discarded, an old blueprint for a house he'd already demolished. Friends were awkward, unsure whose side to take. Some disappeared. The isolation deepened, a heavy cloak that muffled the sounds of the outside world, leaving only the roaring of the ocean and the echoing silence of my empty house. Everything felt like it was crumbling. My legal options dwindled. My financial reserves, separate from Michael's newly acquired fortune, were being drained by the endless legal back and forth. The developers were impatient, pushing harder, threatening further legal action to expedite our removal. I was served with papers that felt like the final nail in the coffin, a formal lawsuit to force the sale and vacant possession. All seemed lost. The house was packed in boxes, a life reduced to labeled containers. The smell of dust and packing tape replaced the salt and green of the dunes. I sat on the floor of the empty living room, surrounded by the ghosts of furniture and memories, the sound of distant construction equipment a constant, mocking reminder. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was losing everything. Then the midpoint shift. It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like a slow dawning as I sifted through the wreckage of my life. I wasn't just losing a house. I was losing my identity. My connection to this place wasn't just ownership. It was deeper, woven into the fabric of the land itself. My family hadn't just owned the estate. They had owned this stretch of coastline for generations. And, critically, they had structured the leases for some of the surrounding properties. The developers, Coastal Development Holdings, hadn't bought the land outright. They had acquired Michael's interest in the property, the house, and surrounding acreage, but the core ownership structure involved a complex, century-old land lease agreement covering not just my specific plot, but a significant portion of the adjacent coastline they planned to develop. The midpoint shift wasn't about getting the house back. That seemed impossible now. It was about realizing that the fight wasn't over the past, but over the future. It wasn't about reversing a sale. It was about controlling the consequences of that sale. Michael had sold the property interest, yes, but he hadn't sold the underlying land lease. That lease was held by Coastal Development Holdings, granting them rights to build on the land owned by, well, ultimately, my family's historical trust, which was now primarily in my control, even after the property sale. My perspective shifted from defending to attacking, from trying to undo the past to strategically seizing control of the future. The raw grief and despair began to solidify into something colder, harder, something that felt a lot like resolve. The deepening crisis continued even as my perspective shifted. Michael's divorce lawyers were relentless, pushing for a swift settlement that would leave me with a fraction of what was rightfully mine, leveraging the money he'd gained from the sale. Coastal Development Holdings filed injunctions to speed up my removal from the property. My own legal team, though now pursuing a different angle related to the land lease complexities, warned me that this was a long shot, incredibly expensive and complex. The legal battles were fought on multiple fronts: the divorce, the forced sale, and the obscure battle over the nuances of the land lease. Each day brought new documents, new demands, new attacks. It felt like being besieged. My resources were finite, my emotional energy near depletion. I was running on pure, cold anger and a stubborn refusal to let him, or them, win completely. There were days I wanted to give up, to just walk away and try to build a life elsewhere. But the thought of him getting away with it, of my family's legacy being wiped away for his profit, fueled a fire I didn't know I possessed. I was facing imminent eviction. The developers had secured the necessary court order. They were coming to take possession. The date was set. I was packing the last few boxes, the air thick with the scent of finality, the house echoing my defeat. I stood on the empty porch, the key heavy in my hand, one last time. The waves crashed indifferent. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brutal oranges and reds. It felt like the end of my world. But as I stood there, the sand cool beneath my bare feet for the last time, something solidified inside me. The despair was still there, a dull ache, but beneath it, a steel rod had formed. I wasn't going to just walk away. I wasn't going to let him enjoy his ill-gotten gains while my life lay in ruins. He thought he'd won. He thought selling the property gave him control, gave him the money, gave him a clean break. But he'd underestimated me. He'd underestimated the depth of my connection to this land, the intricacies of my family's history, and my capacity for cold, strategic action when pushed to the absolute brink. The turning point was the moment I locked the door for the last time, not with the resignation of defeat, but with the quiet fury of a predator circling. I wouldn't fight him in court over the sale. I wouldn't fight the developers over the eviction. I would fight them in a way they couldn't anticipate, on ground they thought was secure. My strategy wasn't about saving the house anymore. It was about owning the future of the development he'd so eagerly sold my past to. It was about acquiring Coastal Development Holdings. The plan formed in the quiet, empty apartment I rented inland. It was audacious, borderline insane. Coastal Development Holdings wasn't a small firm. It was a significant player in regional development. Acquiring it would require immense capital, intricate financial maneuvering, and absolute secrecy. But I had advantages Michael hadn't foreseen. My family's network, though not tied up in liquid assets like Michael's new fortune, was vast and deep-seated in this region's old money. I leveraged every connection, called in every favor, presented a vision not of sentimental preservation, but of strategic control over prime coastal real estate development. I framed it as a hostile takeover opportunity, a chance to seize control of a potentially lucrative portfolio by targeting a weakness, the complex land lease structure that Coastal Development Holdings was built upon. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was a force assembling resources, building a war chest, gathering intelligence. The process was a blur of hushed meetings, non-disclosure agreements, presentations to skeptical investors, frantic phone calls with a new team of lawyers and financial experts who understood the kind of fight I was now waging. Michael was oblivious, basking in his perceived victory, probably already spending the money. He had no idea I wasn't licking my wounds. I was sharpening my knives. The development on my former property was progressing, initial site clearing, geological surveys. Each piece of news was a fresh sting, but it also fueled my resolve. The closer they got to building, the more valuable controlling their operation became. The deepening crisis morphed into a period of intense, secret struggle. I was a phantom limb reaching into the world of high finance, executing a maneuver designed to cut the head off the snake. The plot twist was meticulously planned, timed for maximum impact. Coastal Development Holdings was holding a press conference. Ostensibly, it was to announce the groundbreaking on their new, flagship coastal project, the one built on the land that used to be my home. Michael was invited, of course, as the man who made it all possible, the visionary who unlocked the potential of the site. He was probably there to give a triumphant speech, to accept accolades for his shrewd business sense. I wasn't invited. Why would I be? I was just the evicted ex-wife, a relic of the past. The conference was set up near the site, the ocean a backdrop to their pronouncements of progress and profit. Cameras were rolling, reporters were scribbling notes. Michael stood beaming next to the CEO of Coastal Development Holdings, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He looked like he was about to speak. This was it. The climax. I walked in then. Not through the main entrance, but from the side, escorted by a phalanx of serious-looking men in dark suits, my new legal and security team. The air shifted. Heads turned. A ripple went through the crowd. Michael saw me. His smile faltered. His eyes widened, confusion warring with disbelief. What was I doing here? I didn't look at him. I walked directly to the stage. The CEO of Coastal Development Holdings, a man I now technically owned, looked startled, then pale, recognizing the lead lawyer at my side. He had been informed moments before the press conference began, his carefully constructed composure shattering in real time. I reached the microphone. The clicking of cameras intensified. The sea breeze, carrying the scent of salt and pulverized earth, whipped at my hair. I could feel Michael's eyes on me, burning holes in my back. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady, amplified across the site, carrying over the sound of the waves. You're here today to witness the groundbreaking of a new project. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And indeed you are. But perhaps not in the way you expected. I turned slightly, just enough to catch Michael's eye. He was frozen, his face ashen. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. He knew, instantly. He didn't know how, but he knew I wasn't here by accident. As of precisely 9 o'clock this morning, I continued, my voice gaining strength, ringing with cold, hard triumph. The controlling stake in Coastal Development Holdings has been acquired. A gasp went through the crowd. The CEO next to me visibly swallowed, his face a mask of shock. This acquisition, I stated, holding their gaze, includes all assets, projects, and, critically, all existing land lease agreements held by the company. I let that sink in. The land lease. The ancient document my family's trust controlled. The foundation of their entire project. Which means, I finished, my voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power, that the future of this specific development, on this specific piece of land, will now be directed by me. I looked directly at Michael then. His face crumpled. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving them a sickly gray. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He took a stumbling step back, his hand going to his chest. The self-satisfied developer, the shrewd businessman who had sold my home, was watching his entire world implode. He had gained a fortune by selling my past, only for me to acquire the future he planned to build on it. He hadn't just lost the money he'd gained, he'd lost control, leverage, and reputation. His masterpiece was now under my command. He gasped again, a ragged, desperate sound. His knees buckled. He swayed, reaching out blindly for support that wasn't there. Then, in front of the cameras, the reporters, his former colleagues, and the CEO of the company I now owned, Michael collapsed. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, a heap of expensive suit and shattered ambition. The world went silent for a beat, the only sound the distant roar of the ocean that had witnessed everything. The camera flashes became a strobe light over his prone form. Security rushed forward. Chaos erupted around the stage. But I didn't move. I stood at the microphone, the new owner, the one left standing amidst the ruins he had created. The aftermath wasn't a neat, happy ending. Michael was taken away, a crumpled symbol of his own undoing. His collapse was apparently stress-induced, a physical manifestation of his mind failing to process the absolute reversal of fortune. He didn't die, not physically, but something essential in him seemed to break. The legal battles shifted overnight. The divorce settlement became drastically different, no longer about him generously granting me a share of his money, but about him losing everything and owing me. The developers, or rather, my newly acquired firm, had to deal with the fallout of the management change and the uncertain future of the flagship project. As the new owner of Coastal Development Holdings, I held all the cards for that stretch of coastline. I could halt the development entirely, or reshape it according to my own vision, one that respected the land, the history, the ocean. The money Michael gained from selling the property was a fraction of the value I now commanded through controlling the entire development firm built on that land lease. The plot twist wasn't just that he lost, it was that his act of betrayal, intended to enrich himself and erase my connection to the land, inadvertently positioned me to seize control of something far larger and more powerful than the estate itself. The house was gone. That ache remained, a phantom limb. The smell of salt on the breeze still carried a tinge of loss. But the raw wound had scabbed over, replaced by a hard, protective layer. I walked the beach again months later. The fence was down. The survey markers were gone. The sand was just sand again, soft and familiar under my bare feet. The development was on hold, its future uncertain, but in my hands. Victory tasted complex. It wasn't sweet. It was cold and metallic, the taste of wielding power forged in betrayal. I hadn't saved my home, not in its physical form. But I had saved something else, my dignity, my agency, the deep-rooted connection to this place that went beyond legal title. I had turned his weapon back on him, acquiring not just a company, but the very future he tried to steal from me. Life isn't the predictable horizon I once knew. It's the ever-changing tide, powerful, sometimes destructive, but ultimately survivable if you learn to navigate its currents. The house is a memory, a poignant photograph in my mind. The land remains, breathing under the wide sky, waiting. I stand here now, not as the evicted owner, but as the steward, the one who weathered the storm and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. The sand sifts between my toes, still familiar. The future stretches before me, vast and uncertain, but finally, irrevocably, mine to shape. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.